Sounds good.
Okay, great.
Well, I just want to welcome everyone for, thank you for joining this third stakeholder webinar. If you can go to the next slide. As many of you know, the Maine Climate Action Report, as well as the legislature, the Maine Climate Action Report talked about the importance of energy storage, and then the Maine legislature took an important step in terms of setting some ambitious energy storage targets for 2030 and 2050. And so we have conducted the study. We really appreciate the engagement that we've had over the last two stakeholder calls and the emails and phone calls between now and then. And I look forward to E3 going through the content of the final report, which we were just circulated earlier today, understanding that not all of you have had time to delve into it. We also see this as the beginning of conversation between the state and the folks interested in energy storage as we think about future policy conversations and ways that we can continue to support the growth of the industry here in the state. So thank you again for joining, and I'll turn it back to Tristan.
Great. Oops, Tristan, you're on mute.
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, I'll turn it over to you for
Perfect.
Yeah, further slides.
You can move ahead. Great. So thanks, Selena, and thanks to everyone for joining today. As we, as Selena mentioned, the report was posted today on the Governor's Energy Office website and is being circulated. And we really have appreciated your help getting us here and providing feedback, as I'll note in some of the following slides. The goal of today is to, provide kind of the some of the final kind of key takeaways from the study, as well as some of the analysis updates that were not in the previous session, as well as talk about the policy considerations. So I'll kind of set things up with a brief kind of recap on the project goals, and then hand off to my colleague Tristan, who will walk through those takeaways and policy considerations. Similar to last time as well, we'll do, spend most of the second half of the session answering questions about the study. And, if there are questions on, next steps between us and GEO, we can speak to that. Tristan, you want to move ahead? Yeah, perfect. Great. So just, as in the previous sessions, kind of the quick housekeeping is that if you have questions as we're going through, we'll collect them in the queue to respond to after we get through this brief set of slides. You can either use the raise hand feature as shown kind of option 1 in the figure here, or you can use the chat feature. And we ask that you chat to all panelists so everyone on our team can review and allocate the question accordingly, across GEO and members of our E3 team. Next slide. So I think most of the folks on the phone participated in our previous sessions, but for anyone new this time, my name is Liz Medital, and I am a senior project manager based in E3's Boston office. And we're here on behalf of E3, which is an energy economics consulting firm focused on energy and electricity markets, with offices based in Boston, San Francisco, New York, and Calgary. And we work with clients across a range of perspectives from, states, regulators, as well as utilities, developers, et cetera. And we've done a bunch of recent storage market analyses, which you can find on our website. Next slide. So this is just a reminder that, this project was motivated by some really ambitious and, exciting energy storage goals for the state of Maine, and support the state's electric sector, broader electric sector decarbonization goals of 80% RPS or renewables by 2030 and 100% clean energy by 2050. These storage targets are really designed to help Maine achieve a clean electric grid. And so the 300 megawatts by 2025 and 400 megawatts by 2030. So in the previous sessions, we talked through, the technology assessment and policy and market factors, as well as the draft cost benefit analysis results. In this session, we'll talk through the kind of key takeaways that came out of those pieces, and then the policy considerations based on that assessment, which are also kind of built out in much more detail in the report online. Go to the next slide. So on this slide, we want to call out, the significance of this energy storage target, both, across the U.S., in New England, and in, the work that Maine is doing to achieve this target. So, Maine is the 9th state to set an energy storage target as of the beginning of 2022. Its 2030 target of 400 megawatts represents, roughly 17% or so of Maine's electric demand. So what this means is that, it's one of the most ambitious targets in the country, given its relatively small power system. And so that's kind of what's shown on the left here. That's a map of the US, as you know, with states with storage targets kind of called out in blue, and the darker blues representing kind of larger state targets relative to the size of the electric system. Now, on the right, you see a long list of planned and operating energy storage projects. Maine is making pretty impressive progress towards its goal. There are about 50 megawatts of operating projects and over 200 planned projects, as well as many more megawatts within the interconnection queue, recognizing that those beyond what's on this list are still more speculative in nature at this point, but certainly the state is making a lot of really exciting progress towards its storage target. Next slide. So as we've talked about in the previous sessions, the cost benefit analysis is a spreadsheet model designed to evaluate different use cases for batteries. Given we had set specific criteria around kind of what types of storage are most likely to be deployed in Maine over the study period, so kind of through 2030, 2031. So, storage, has kind of the ability to provide important, energy and capacity services in the near term. It is, mature, commercially available with a relative, with a lower cost, a falling cost, and it is also kind of makes up, most of the projects across the U.S. that are being built today, though not all. Within the report, we evaluate more broadly other storage technologies, emerging and long duration energy storage technologies. And, we would just want to note that the study is not, meant to be prescriptive, but that, a range of storage technologies can help Maine achieve its target. And we, want the state to kind of seriously consider and promote a technology neutral approach to pursuing storage projects or supporting storage projects. Go to the next slide. So I won't get into this slide in too much detail this time, as we've talked about it in, I think, both of our previous sessions, but this is just a reminder that we can refer back to if there are questions, that this is the structure of the cost benefit analysis model that we use. So the model takes input data related to potential benefit streams, and then data related to storage costs, and performs two types of storage, kind of dispatch or charging and discharging, One is for grid connected front of the meter storage, and the other is for behind the meter, customer sited storage. And what comes out is benefits and costs from a range of perspective, including from the perspective of the participant, from the ratepayer, and from the state. Next slide. So the last point we wanted to make before switching over to discussing key takeaways and the additional results is that we received many helpful comments and questions throughout the study process, and we want to thank you all for contributing to making the project a success through this feedback. So we had over 180 individuals, 70 organizations, 100 plus questions. And these really did help to guide our study and refine both the analysis and the framing of that analysis. And so we really appreciate everyone who contributed throughout the study. So thank you. And with that, I'm going to pass the mic to my colleague Tristan, the project manager for this study, who will talk through the key takeaways.
Great. Well, thanks, Liz. Yeah, and like Liz said, we appreciate everyone's involvement throughout this study. I think it really helped us, create a great report that we released earlier today. So, yeah, and we appreciate you all joining us again. So, like Liz said, I'll go over some key takeaways. We have 6 key takeaways that I'll discuss here, and these are, of course, highlighted in the report. So here are the first 2. And we see that there, could be multiple technologies that contribute to Maine's storage target. But if we really look over the near term, in the next 5 years or through this decade, and also what as Liz talked about, what we focused on our benefit cost analysis, we do see that lithium ion batteries are likely to comprise most of that storage deployed. And that's, of course, again, why we focus that on lithium ion batteries in our benefit cost analysis. And like Liz said, this is due to a variety of factors, lithium ion batteries, historical and expected cost declines, its high round trip efficiency and siting flexibility, its ability to provide, fast response, to integrate and balance renewables. It's also commercially mature and easily deployed in Maine. So that's the first key takeaway from this study. Next is around the benefits and value streams that storage can provide to the state of Maine. As we've discussed throughout the study, there's a wide range of value streams, and these can vary by market segment, ranging from energy arbitrage in the wholesale energy market to ancillary services, to providing peaking capacity and avoided T&D benefits, to bill savings for customer-sided storage and also resiliency benefits. But we also see that these benefits will evolve over time as markets change and the needs of the grids and as well as customers change. And for instance, we expect that wholesale benefits to evolve away from ancillary services as those markets become saturated. But the opportunity for energy arbitrage in the longer term will increase with higher renewable penetration. And from a societal perspective, some of the highest value services, may be from avoided T&D costs, which you'll see. But realizing those benefits will depend on, where the storage is sited. Is it in the most valuable locations, and can you monetize those specific benefits? So those are the first 2 key takeaways. Moving on to the next slide, is the third key takeaway around the cost effectiveness for wholesale or grid connected storage. A few things I wanted to note about the cost effectiveness. Now, first, this assumes a mid-range of costs, and these costs largely rely on estimates from both NREL's annual technology baseline as well as Lazard's storage report, the 7th version. And both cost estimates came out in 2021, so they don't, just to kind of caveat, they don't necessarily consider all recent supply chain and events that have taken place in the global economy recently. But even given these mid-range of costs, we do see the cost declining fairly significantly through 2030. Also, this view of cost effectiveness assumes that all wholesale revenue streams can be accessed and optimized. That's the wholesale energy market, ancillary services. For ancillary services, we primarily looked at regulation and spinning reserve, and then of course the capacity market. But given all that, looking at the chart on the left, we see that wholesale standalone storage is cost effective from the owner perspective by the middle of this decade. Now, obviously, certain projects will vary from this based on specific parameters of that project, their location, and how they optimize the value streams. But I think this underscores how important it is to access all these value streams and for costs to continue to decline. Looking at the chart on the right is a comparison of storage in 2023 and 2030 from the societal perspective. And again, this underscores how avoided T&D costs, which are, make up the largest portion of the benefits, they can provide specific significant value. But as I mentioned earlier, realizing those benefits can be project and location specific. All right, so moving on to the next slide is a look at a key takeaway around customer-sided storage. So on the other side of the meter, and a few things to note here. For customer-sided storage, we're looking here at a C&I customer, and the value streams it can storage can reduce electricity bills. In this case, we're looking at demand charges that C&I customers face, and it can also provide large resiliency benefits. But I should note that the resiliency benefit shown here is based on a value of lost load estimate from DOE's interruption cost estimate calculator, as well as historical outages for C&I customers in Maine. In reality, each C&I customer will have their own value of lost load, so this could obviously differ. But given these benefits, it does appear that C&I customer-sided storage can be quite cost-effective from both an owner and a societal perspective. And moving on to the last slide for the takeaways are two additional items to note. The first is just highlighting how long duration storage, which we did not analyze in the benefit cost analysis here, but it can support the need for clean, firm energy in New England, as decarbonization advances. E3 expects that as decarbonization targets become stricter, over this decade and the next, this will increase the reliability need when load is high and renewable output is low, likely in winter months. Also, as technology costs fall, as Liz discussed earlier, long duration storage could meet this need. But long duration storage technologies, they're still in their development phase, but Maine should continue to monitor their progress. And finally, we want to note that hurdles still remain, to near-term storage deployment in Maine. First, costs, how fast they decline will continue to be a focus, as well as accessing and monetizing revenue streams, and the importance of value stacking and optimizing these revenue streams. And lastly, I'd say that some of the real value of storage will not be seen until higher levels of renewable penetration are on the system. But with that, there are many policies and actions that Maine can consider to alleviate barriers and accelerate storage deployment, which I'll discuss in some upcoming slides. But first, before I move on to those policy considerations, I wanted to highlight some cost sensitivities that we included in the report that were conducted after the last stakeholder session, given some interest expressed from stakeholders. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the costs used in the cost benefit analysis were the mid-range of costs, but included here are the high and low estimates for wholesale storage, which is the chart on top, and customer-sided storage for C&I customers, the chart down below. And these cost ranges rely on NREL's 2021 annual technology baseline, using both the advanced as well as the conservative scenarios, which are based on literature review that NREL performs. And overall, these costs differ over time, really given the uncertainty increases as to how storage market will evolve over time. So this is just a feel for the range, relative to the midpoint. So moving on to the next slide is a look at the cost benefit analysis results using these cost ranges. And you can see, in the cost portion of the columns, there's 3 portions. The bottom is the low costs. The portion on top of that is the incremental cost for the mid range, and then the incremental cost on top of that is for the high range. And for wholesale storage, the chart on the left, higher costs could lead to about 35% higher cost by 2030, which would, given our benefit cost analysis, this would delay the timing cost effectiveness by a couple of years. Looking at the chart on the right for C&I standard storage, higher costs could lead to an increase of about 30% by 2030. But as you can see with the benefits, given the high resiliency benefits for C&I customers, it would still heavily outweigh these higher costs. But I should note that without the resiliency benefits, even lower costs would not be enough, if bill savings alone were the only benefit that a C&I customer included in its analysis. So, overall, that's just a bit about the cost sensitivities to give folks a sense of the range. I also want to note that there was also stakeholder interest and sensitivity around natural gas prices. While we didn't include that sensitivity in the report, I will note that higher natural gas prices, like we're experiencing today, they'll increase the absolute spread in daily energy prices, and which is beneficial to storage because that'll increase the potential for energy arbitrage revenue. And also, I'd say, over the long term, if those gas prices persist, it'll improve the economics for renewable resources, which are price-taking resources, wind and solar, which could increase their penetration, which would give further opportunity for storage. So kind of, 2 factors at play that I just wanted to mention, even though we didn't dive specifically into that natural gas price sensitivity. All right, so moving on, I want to talk about some policy considerations as well as some future analysis. So here's a look at near-term policy considerations to encourage storage deployment in Maine. And the first is to support technology-neutral approaches to storage. While lithium-ion batteries are the best position today, as I discussed, the cost of other storage technologies are also falling, and the relative position could change over time. And as I mentioned earlier, long-duration storage could become an important part of a deeper decarbonization future in the region. And next is with regards to storage development, and for the state to support actions to ease the development process. And this is looking at roadblocks for permitting, interconnection, siting, customer identification. And some specific options for this include, a standardized statewide permitting process to lessen, both the time and the resources that it takes to coordinate across local jurisdictions. Also, another option is our policies and guides for interconnection that align with ISO New England. This can reduce developer time and resources, as well as including interconnection procedures, such as how storage is often, treated in system impact studies. This was a kind of a key point identified by stakeholders. And lastly is around data collection to ensure storage is sited, where and with whom it can provide the most value. And this includes available sites for development, remaining substation capacity to add storage, what's the hourly data at substations, and finally, customer class data, which can, you can better target retail storage. And next is around data, and specifically for here, we're thinking of tracking storage deployment progress across the state, as the state advances towards its storage goals. And this will let the state know, where it stands relative to its target and what use cases and value streams were accessed when the storage was built, so policy can be appropriately targeted. What's working in the state, what maybe needs some, additional policy consideration, so that can be appropriately placed. Another consideration is policy leadership, emphasizing, storage and efforts to invest in renewables and energy efficiency at state facilities. And this will, leverage the state's purchasing power. It could include procurement requirements for storage at state facilities. And all this will really build upon Maine's Lead by Example report, which was released last year, that considers storage on state property and to improve resiliency at critical care facilities. Moving on, next is information. And specifically, this is making resources available to local communities to accommodate storage. Storage is rapidly evolving, and helping these communities know the benefits of storage and the hurdles they could face, when they're trying to encourage storage development, could help ease the process of adoption. Next is planning. This could include monitoring federal guidance regarding end of life and decommissioning of storage facilities, so you can plan for when these resources will eventually retire. And lastly, for the near-term policy considerations is related to a stakeholder group that Gio will touch upon at the end of the session. And we see this as a way for Gio to leverage its role as a convener by bringing in interested parties, sharing information, all to encourage storage in the state, but in the best, most efficient way possible. So that's a look at some of the near-term policy considerations. Moving on to the next slide is a look at some longer-term policy considerations. And I should note that these, unlike those in the near term, will rely on coordination across various regional and state agencies. The first one is with rate design. As was often mentioned by stakeholders in their feedback, this can include supporting adjustments to rate design that align customer price signals with societal avoided costs and locational values. And this will really, ensure storage is deployed in a way that maximizes its effectiveness. Next are cost-benefit analysis frameworks, and specifically supporting, the consideration of the best possible value streams from all perspectives in cost-benefit analysis frameworks, and ensuring that the value streams are optimized and stacked for maximum effectiveness. And this can apply to the framework used to analyze DERs by Maine's distributed generation stakeholder group, as well as the Maine PUC procurement process, where storage resources compete with other types of generating technologies. Next are incentive programs. Even though costs are falling, adding incentive programs for all kinds of storage can encourage deployment. We saw that without the inclusion of resiliency benefits, bill savings alone are not enough to make up for customer-cited storage costs. And so if customers discount storage's resiliency benefits, adding incentives could be important for increasing their adoption. And incentive programs also be important to encourage storage and unlock some of the societal benefits, that are not currently monetizable, for a storage owner. And all this can build off of programs that are already proposed in the state, specifically by Efficiency Maine Trust in their 5th triennial plan. And lastly, for longer-term policy considerations are charging tariffs. The state of Maine should support the development of fair and transparent charging tariffs for storage connected to the distribution system. Currently is being charged retail rates for charging energy, even when its discharge is supporting the wholesale system. And I'll note this wasn't actually explicitly explored in our analysis, as we modeled wholesale storage as connected to the transmission system, but it was consistently mentioned by stakeholders in their feedback as a key hurdle to storage development. Okay, so that's a look at some of the policy considerations for the state to encourage storage deployment and advance towards its storage targets. So now, moving on to the next slide, before we open it up to some questions from the audience, I wanted to, talk about some ideas that E3 had for future analysis. And we included this in the report. I'll note that this is not meant to be an exhaustive list, but given the relatively short timeline of the study, GEO asked us what future analysis might be useful as the state continues to pursue its storage targets. I would say really that the broad theme here is that these are things that can be done to better determine where in the state storage should be deployed. What we've listed first here is a peaker replacement analysis. And this would be a more specific analysis that was conducted here. And it would take into account the specific operations of a peaking plant and whether that specific plant could be operationally replaced by storage, and also whether it makes economic sense. Emission reduction benefits can also be quantified, and even looking at options for hybrid solutions, where storage can be added to not fully replace, but reduce the operations of a peaker plant. Next is a jobs and economic impact assessment. This could be performed to support where in the state storage development could bring the most benefits to the local economy, which could be used to supplement locational preferences, which are only based on energy dynamics alone. So where are jobs created, and where does the state GDP increase the most, all that. Next is location-specific nodal modeling. So this can be important for analyzing congestion relief that storage can provide when placed at specific locations, as well as renewable integration, or reducing renewable curtailment or the price impacts it has at the place where the renewable generation is injected, which will then impact the energy revenue that the renewable resource sees. Broadly, this is meant to capture some of the benefits of adding storage to strategic locations and prices at a specific node, which, in the end can change where storage might be deployed. And lastly is equity analysis. Storage can provide specific benefits to disadvantaged communities, such as through emission reductions in nearby peaking plants or bill savings. And this is just another example of additional analysis that can be performed to help determine the best locations for storage development. So that's a bit about some potential avenue for further analysis. And with that, I'll turn it over to Tara, my colleague, so we can kick off the Q&A portion of the webinar. Tara, do you want to start taking us through some questions?
Sure, thanks, Tristan. So maybe we'll start with a question that was, do you see gravity and thermal being part of the LDES 2030 portfolio? And maybe Liz, you could speak to that.
Sure. So I think broadly speaking, that will depend on the costs, both capital and operating and maintenance, and operational characteristics of specific projects. So I think, there are, E3 specifically isn't choosing sort of winners or losers or saying, this is what the portfolio is going to be, because it's hard to know how a specific project can operate. I think, there are some, for example, on thermal, like ETS storage projects, in buildings. I think, we've seen that be a nice kind of behind the meter solution. I know there are a lot of utilities with projects that have been very successful, particularly from a participant perspective. And then gravity is really, going to be kind of project specific. I think there I haven't heard of one that I know would be deployed in Maine, but it would be great if someone could do something that's cost effective and provides storage to the grid. But certainly most of the existing projects we've been seeing are batteries. And then I'll just note, I guess, while I'm off mute, I saw a next question around, Australia is a leading lithium producer, China is a lithium leading producer. I think we'd all agree. We know there are all sorts of supply chain challenges and geopolitical risks. So there's certainly a lot of discussion about bringing lithium refining and manufacturing, I guess mining, refining, and manufacturing into the U.S. I think the U.S. is obviously not there today, and we don't necessarily kind of track exactly what will happen in that lithium market, but I do know, there's definitely, I think we'd like to be optimistic about the potential for lithium, in the U.S. and I think I would say, it's possible, maybe in kind of Southern California, there's definitely some untapped kind of lithium brines that we're aware of there. And it would be, great if we could see kind of a rise in domestic lithium production.
Thanks, Liz. So Tristan, there's another question here on sort of the cost benefit analysis side, asking whether environmental benefits, I'll just read the question, I guess. In estimating environmental benefits of storage, do you take into account the life cycle environmental impacts of manufacturing and transport of batteries or other storage technologies?
No, we didn't include a full life cycle analysis. So anything that's included on the emission side, we'll just, you can quantify the specific emissions. Like we have a marginal, so a lot of our analysis included here was based on the AESC report. So there is marginal emission rates from that. So it's a marginal, emission rate in ISO New England and in the Maine zone. And then for the costs of that, it's basically RGGI. And then if you want to include like a social cost of carbon, I believe for social cost of carbon, we're relying on the 2% New York State estimate at a 2% discount rate. So that's broadly what's included in emissions costs.
Thanks, Tristan. And there's also a question about the value of lost load and the interruption estimates and whether these are based on industries in Maine, and also how the market should prioritize different industries based on the economic benefits.
So for the value of lost load and the resiliency benefits that we're quantifying, it was based off of SAIDI and SAIDI estimates, I believe, Tara, for Central Maine Power historically, and then we used the dollar rate figures from DOE's interruption cost estimator. I believe it was just like a CNI customer. I don't know the details around how they're defining a CNI customer. I don't know if you have any more details on that.
Yeah, I don't have more specifics on that. I think it's an industry average though. And like one thing I think definitely to keep in mind is these values of lost load are an average. So you'll see customers which probably value their lost load much higher, and also ones that value it lower. So for sure that would be a consideration in where it makes sense to deploy storage.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Tara.
Right, sorry, just catching up on questions here. So maybe for Liz, do you have any thoughts on or results on how the average installed energy storage duration might change over the next 5 years?
Sure. Yeah. So for this particular study, we didn't model multiple storage durations, but what I can say is from other modeling that we've done in New England, we see, most of the storage built through 2030 being shorter duration, so 4 hours typically, but that long duration start becoming much more valuable in the 2030s. as you really ramp up renewable deployment and need more than kind of the intraday shifting.
Thanks, Liz. And then another question here, are avoided T&D costs for wholesale energy storage in this study currently being monetized, or do changes need to occur in the market to be able to realize these benefits? Tristan, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so our avoided T&D costs are largely driven by what's included in the AESC for, I think, pooled transmission facilities, and then there's also for customer-sided storage, we also included like the local T&D benefit, and that's just based on analysis that had done on expected future T&D investment and what could be avoided. So it's not like project specific. I think it's looking at kind of an average, for the whole regional spend or spend in Maine. And the way I understand, that's not, it's included in the societal cost, but it's not currently monetizable by the storage owner.
Thanks, Tristan. So there's another question here, or comment that, so the demand charge savings for behind the meter systems seem to be in the order of $8 per kilowatt month. Demand charges for commercial customers in Maine are currently between $18 and $25 per kilowatt. What accounts for the very low effectiveness of these systems in reducing demand charge?
I mean, I have to look back at our modeling of that, but it's, I mean, I think it's just, it's how the, storage is able to operate to reduce those demand charges, given its duration and everything. So I don't know if it's like fully comparable to compare the actual demand charges with the benefit you're seeing there. I don't know if, Tara, if you have any other, thoughts given the modeling of that behind the meter dispatch.
Yeah, I don't think I can comment too much more on the specifics. Just yeah, right now without some more of the details in front of me, unfortunately. And there's a question here as well about just wondering about the maximum size of battery energy storage systems. If Liz, you could speak to that.
Well, sure. I mean, we're only modeling 4-hour projects for this study, but obviously the challenge with long duration storage is its costs. So the 4-hour duration projects, the marginal costs of them were much larger than the marginal benefits typically. So they were less attractive from a cost benefit perspective.
Thanks, Liz. There's also a broader question here that came up towards the beginning. Has the panel seen a shift in the storage market based on the recent events that is driving energy surety over renewable?
So I think what I would say is that we're definitely hearing kind of an increasing emphasis on the kind of role of storage as insurance in case other projects don't show up or basically to reduce risks on the electricity system. And we're certainly modeling storage as able to provide some effective capacity based on existing analysis of its ability to provide firm capacity to the system.
Thanks, Liz. And there's a question, I think, here for Geo, Selena, or Carolyn. Maybe you could speak to this. Has Maine's position changed on renewables given surety concerns identified by recent worldwide events? I think this is pretty broad, but I'm not sure if there's some thoughts you want to add here, Selena or Carolyn.
Yeah, I just say that this is Selena Cunningham in the Governor's Energy Office. We've been working over the last 2 years towards aggressive renewable energy and climate requirements that we're working on implementing. And so we recognize that the volatility in the fossil fuel market does impact Maine ratepayers, and we are concerned about that and working on a variety of approaches to address that, but we'll continue on pursuing our aggressive renewable energy storage and climate requirements as laid out by the state and to help reduce our reliance on fossil fuels.
Thanks, Selena. I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat or the Q&A. I'm hoping I haven't missed any.
Tara, anything else? If not, we have a couple more kind of wrap up slides.
Yeah, I think we can probably move to those.
Great. Well, thanks everyone. Thanks again for your participation and all the the great feedback, not only in the stakeholder sessions but also following them. I think it's really helped to bolster our analysis. And we've included a lot of things in our findings from your feedback. But I just wanted to turn it over to the Governor's Energy Office for some closing remarks. They just have a few things they wanted to mention, so I'll turn it over to Selena or Caroline, if you all want to speak to a couple items here.
I'll get off mute. Thank you very much for attending this webinar as well as past webinars. We are certainly going to spend some time digesting the content of this report, thinking about next steps, and would like for you to be a part of that effort. And I want to make sure that you get to meet Caroline. Caroline, if you want to come on and say hello and just walk through a little bit about how people can follow up with you and provide feedback as we plan next steps around storage.
Hi, everybody. I'm Caroline Cole. I'm the Solar and Storage Fellow at the Governor's Energy Office. And I've emailed with many of you over the last few months as we've worked with E3 on this study. So you should have received a link to the study itself from me this morning and a couple other links as well. So the first link you see on the screen also is in that email, is a short survey that is asking for you to share your contact information and interest to help us get set up for an energy storage forum that the GEO will host and convene this group of folks that we've been engaging with and maybe others to continue to talk through barriers, talk through the policy considerations from this assessment in more detail. And also it'd be a great place for many of you to share some of your expertise about programs that are running in other states or kind of other resources that could be helpful in helping the Governor's Energy Office and the legislature think through how to best support the storage industry to meet the state's goals for storage deployment and our broader renewable energy and decarbonization goals. So it'd be great if you could fill that out. And also, as always, feel free to get in touch with me over email. Happy to as we all digest this report over the coming weeks to talk through that in more detail, answer questions, set up some meetings. We'd love to stay in touch, and this is, yeah, sort of the beginning of our storage effort, and look forward to connecting with you all. And we really appreciate E3 for their work. It's been great working with them, learning from them throughout this process. So thanks to them as well for coordinating all of this.
Great, great. Well, yeah, thanks, Caroline. And yeah, thank you to the Governor's Energy Office. It's been a pleasure to work on this study, and hope everyone enjoys the report that we released this morning. And thanks again for your participation. Yeah, we'll conclude the webinar now. Thank you very much.